For our next installment of the AI workshop series. Dr. Wilk is a professor of, associate professor of surgery at IU School of Medicine. He's also a scientist at the Center for Health Services Research, and he is a health economist, mixed methods specialist, and health services researcher. His work is a lot on transplants in terms of high-value care and high-quality care, and focus on individuals with chronic diseases. Jade is an epidemiologist on staff within the Center for Health Services Research, and she works on similar topics as Adam does. Adam joins us remotely. He decided that Washington, D.C. was worth another look. And so he is, I guess, watching the tarmac from, watching his plane on the tarmac at the moment. Both presenters will tell us about the Qual-Al Sandbox, a live transcription and analysis demonstration using LLMs. Many of you who were in this workshop before will remember that Rachel Patzer, who just joined us, and Adam actually gave us the first workshop about qualitative research and AI. We then listened to the voices on our follow-up survey that said, we need to know more about this topic. And so we scheduled a follow-on session. So Adam and Jade will take us through more in-depth analysis using Qual-Al today. And I guess, Adam, you're on if you can hear us. And otherwise, Jade will just take over.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the introduction. And I'm very sorry I couldn't be with you all in person right now. Certainly had planned to be, and then a 90-minute maintenance delay meant that it was not going to be possible for me to make my connection. So I am in Dulles, but still delighted to be with you, at least spiritually, for this conversation about qualitative research and AI. So both Jade and I are mixed methods researchers. We do both qual and quant research. And so in part, what that means is there are likely lots of folks in the audience who know a lot more about qualitative research than we do as a team or individuals. And there are tons of courses and workshops out there led by individuals with extensive research available through IU and elsewhere. Jade recently completed a workshop very much related to the content of this talk today. And I think the resources or the links to some of those resources are available in the slides, which I expect we'll make available at some point soon. I would encourage everyone to check out some of those resources. There are some great folks thinking a lot and deeply about this applications of AI in qualitative research like we're going to be talking about today. Jade, may I ask you to advance the slides for me? Thank you. So just some disclosures here. Nothing super relevant to and specific to today's materials. So our three objectives on the next slide for today include providing an overview of how AI can be integrated across the qualitative research lifecycle. We talked a bit about that last time in the talk in the fall that Titus referenced, that Rachel and I gave. And then we'll be going through some demonstrations of AI in qualitative research, including transcription, coding, and thematic analysis. We covered transcription to a large extent back in the fall, so we'll be focusing more on coding and thematic analysis today. Or perhaps rather, Jade will lead us through these exercises because I expect I'm going to have to board my plane here in a few minutes. And then objective 3, we also hope to examine some of the methodological challenges, limitations, and ethical considerations and recommendations for the use of AI in this space. So before we dig into the material from this workshop, I want to remind everyone, as I believe you've all received some notifications about this via email and in the updated calendar invite, but there are opportunities to participate live in today's session. You can work with us, alongside us, or in parallel, using generative AI tools to go through some of these exercises that Jade and I have prepared for today. So if you're at all interested in doing so, grab your laptop, or if you're attending online, just pull up some of these resources that are, again, available in the calendar invite and were attached in a reminder email, I believe. These include transcript data, open-ended survey response data, code book and some exercise instructions, including prompts. We've assembled all of these things for the workshop today. They're brand new. We can't promise all of them will work perfectly, but we have tested them, and so we hope you find them illuminating to work through. The material that you're looking at is not real data, so we're not worried about inadvertently identifying participants or violating agreements of disclosure with them or anything like that. These are all simulated data, so you can feel free to use these data as you wish. All right. So let's move into some of the core content for today. We'll be talking about where AI fits into qualitative research and what should we be thinking about when we use AI as opposed to conducting a qualitative research project without it. So this pretty diagram, I think, helps in illustrating that qualitative research involves many different components. It is an attempt to understand how and why people experience the world professionally, personally, and so on. Focuses on meaning, not just measurement, and that's an important distinction for today. Importantly, interpretation in qualitative research is an active exercise. This isn't a neutral observer trying to observe something objectively. We are, as researchers, not just extracting information, we're continuously making decisions about what things mean, how concepts relate, how context shapes those interpretations, and so on. This is a subjective exercise, and subjectivity is part of rigor in qualitative research. It's not a weakness. We explicitly acknowledge our role through reflexivity and think about how it shapes the analysis we are conducting. It affects our theoretical framing. It affects our interpretation if we're doing it well. We have to acknowledge it and think about it, but it is part of the process if done well. Now, this becomes especially important when introducing AI into the process. AI can identify patterns, group text, categorize it, generate outputs that look structured and coherent, but they don't possess reflexivity, contextual understanding, awareness of meaning, any of those things in the ways that we would. So because of this, the responsibility remains with us as the researcher to interpret outputs, validate meaning, and otherwise ensure that the analysis reflects the lived experiences and context of participants. That's our onus. Yes, next slide, thank you. So with that, AI is of course everywhere. See all of the previous installments of this seminar series and workshop series. In the context of qualitative research, just like these others, things are changing very rapidly. So basically anything we have to say today will be outdated as soon as we're done talking. And yet it does seem like these tools, generative AI and so on, can process unstructured data quickly and efficiently in ways that hold a lot of appeal for qualitative researchers. So let's move to the next slide and highlight that there are lots of different steps of the qualitative research process where AI can be involved. We presented this slide back in the fall, so I'm not going to dwell on it too long. But suffice to say that all of these steps are important. Many of them are notoriously slow to undertake and do well. And so AI holds a lure to speed up many of these parts of the process. And just to give you a few examples, on the research question brainstorming, you can imagine AI could take a general research interest and structure it into clear, falsifiable hypotheses or open-ended questions that could benefit from qualitative inquiry. And this might be really valuable, for example, for junior researchers who are trying to figure out how to explore a topic area with which they may be unfamiliar. A little further down the line, thematic analysis, AI can be very powerful potentially in identifying patterns and themes across large data sets. If you have a very large qualitative data set, like open-ended responses to a survey from 1,000 participants, doing qualitative research the old-fashioned way might feel daunting. And yet AI could potentially be very useful in comparing content, themes, relating participants' responses to some of their characteristics as identified elsewhere in the survey, and so forth. Lots of opportunities to do a lot of this work well, perhaps, with AI. And yet, if you click again, Jade, of course, all of these things are slow. And so it is enticing to think about opportunities to do them more quickly with AI, and perhaps with minimal risks to the robustness of the qualitative research process, at least in some cases. But that's our job to figure out what are the risks that are presented when we incorporate AI into these processes. Okay, so the literature tells us so far that AI is very useful in some tasks and perhaps questionable in others, just like you would expect. A systematic review of 40 papers that we've done in this space reveals some consistent themes, like AI is effective in speeding up tasks like transcription, coding, and synthesis. And yet, published studies consistently argue speed isn't everything. As you might expect, if qualitative researchers are doing this work, they're defending their turf and arguing that researchers need to be critically involved in order to assess AI outputs, validate findings, and be transparent about all steps of the research process, including how AI was used. And talking about what are the potential implications of using AI for the findings of any given study. There's several examples of these. Rachel and I walked through a couple examples of these papers, but in general, these papers tend to do side-by-side, like horse race style comparisons of AI as a partner in the research study alongside a human a teammate, and comparisons are done with respect to speed and the quality of the output with respect to some criteria, and these themes tend to persist. Again, some of the benefits of increased speed using generative AI or other tools tend to be realized, particularly in studies using larger data sources. In some cases, those studies might not have been attempted at all, but for the availability of AI. But again, the main theme here is that AI might be a powerful co-analyst, but as yet is not considered a replacement for human insight as we strive for in qualitative research. Okay, so I've only got a couple more slides here, and then we'll get into some of the exercises we have planned for today, and that is where I'm going to have to hand the reins over to Jade to lead us through them, because my plane is in fact boarding. So what you're looking at here is a diagram that shows how iterative qualitative research can be when done well. It's not a linear process moving from research questions to theory, research design, data collection, analysis, and dissemination. You might like it to be for efficiency's sake, but too often, once you collect data, you need to go back to theory and reconsider the research design, maybe collect more data. And then when you go to analysis, you may have to go back to collect more data if you haven't reached saturation or the like. Lots of reasons to think this is an iterative process if done well. And whenever you have these feedback loops, there are opportunities for reconsidering the involvement or the methods we use for incorporating AI into this workflow. There are outputs that we observe from the human or from the AI that we can and should be assessing before we progress to the next step of the research life cycle. And we can go back and iterate on the AI and what assumptions we have made as human researchers when working with AI. Between the two of us and multiple rounds of iterative refinement of our steps and processes, I think we can probably find ourselves producing something that's still valuable, even when potentially risking some compromises to the integrity or rigor of the qualitative process using AI tools. And honestly, if we're not using AI, we should still be iterating in the same way, right? So that should feel familiar even when working with an AI tool in a qualitative research workflow. Okay, one more slide. And so the main theme of what we have to share with you over the coming exercises is a pretty simple statement consistent with the literature, and that is, if you want your qualitative research to be rigorous, it means you have to be an active human in the loop. That phrase is commonly used in this workshop and elsewhere to talk about how the relationship between the human, in this case, the researcher, and the AI partner. There are certain things that you as an active human in the loop need to be thinking about or doing if you're going to be an effective qualitative researcher working with the current generation of AI tools, we believe. And we're hoping to illustrate a few of those points through the exercises to come. So with that, the next handful of slides and hopefully most of the remainder of today's workshop, we will be walking through a couple of exercises that illustrate some of these key points. Jade will be leading the discussion. And Jade, I know there's a couple of ethical principles a couple slides from now. Do you want to take over with those, or do you want me to touch on them first?
Whatever you'd prefer, Adam. If you'd like to get on your flight, I can take those.
Yeah, I probably should board a plane.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Adam.
Have a good flight.
Okay, so next we're going to jump into taking some time to explore applications of AI in our qualitative workflows, and we'll see what happens. So to be clear, before we jump in to using AI in qualitative research, it's essential to really consider ethics. We've heard this in previous presentations, in using AI in the pre-research study design phase. So before using AI, there are a few key steps that we've talked about as a team and literature kind of presents. First, IRB and disclosures. So many institutions are requiring researchers to explicitly state how AI is being used. So IU doesn't necessarily, to my knowledge, have any specific policies, though we're aware of some discussions that are ongoing. So there might be things changing and requirements coming. Second is informed consent. So participants should understand if their data is being used or processed using AI and what this may entail. So in previous workshops, Dr. Schwartz observed that, well, it's not clear what the best practices are in terms of talking to participants about AI and what we should expect their reaction to be, right? We think that participants deserve to know that this is occurring with their data. And yet, in the interest of promoting autonomy and beneficence, we would contend that being transparent in the use of AI is appropriate and consistent with existing norms around informed consent. Yes.
So how do we handle if we have qualitative data that was collected but not yet analyzed, but consent's been obtained, and now we're considering we would want to use it, but I mean, the study is over essentially. So is there any way you can kind of go back? I mean, you obviously can't re-consent people.
Mm-hmm.
But would you need to do an IRB amendment? Or, I mean, certainly you would disclose it in your analyses and papers and things like that. But for example, the grant was written before we even had AI to use for qualitative. So, you know.
Yeah, this is a good question. It's something that we actually did with our research study. And some of the stuff that Dr. Patzer and Wilk presented at the last one, we ended up de-identifying all of the data. We used open-ended survey responses, and then we resubmitted it to IRB and had them review and got approval to use the de-identified version of that data.
All the transcripts are already de-identified.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
you still need the IRB.
Yeah, you still need to go back with IRB and clearly outline your plans for using AI.
Is it because at the time the IRB protocol was approved, saying that you were using a different method?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't know, in the room here, as the people online here, do you need to repeat the question or the comments from in the room? Do you know?
No, the mics pick up everybody.
They pick
So
up
just
everybody.
make sure you project a little bit,
Okay.
but it
Yeah.
should.
But I think when in doubt, we just always submit the IRB amendment.
Okay.
And I don't think it's taken too long. Yeah, go
It
ahead.
didn't take a long time.
Okay.
They actually deemed it not human subject research. But in reporting paper, you want to make sure that we're clear and that IRB has approved it.
Okay. And then did you proceed, did you do your analysis then the same way that you originally said you were going to do it and AI and compared them, or?
So what we did was we had already done the analysis first. And then we wanted to explore, differences in how AI would produce the thematic analysis versus us as researchers. And so then we just went back and did it separately.
Can I ask a question as well?
Yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
ask a question? Sorry. So if we've already kind of done all of our analysis by like researchers on our team, and we want to run it through AI just to see if it matches what we've already come up with, is that something that we would still need? It's all de-identified transcripts. Is that something that we would still need IRB approval for, even if it's not being used in official data analysis?
I still think you would want to get IRB approval because you're still inputting the data, regardless of the fact that it's de-identified, you're still inputting it into the AI software. And I think just for best practices, I would get IRB approval for that.
Okay, thanks.
And have you ever had an issue publishing a qualitative paper where you didn't originally say that you were going to use it, but then between like data collection and analysis, you've now decided to use it? Like,
I think we have not had that issue. I'll just jump in, but I would clarify in the methods section what was sort of your a priori approach versus post hoc approach in that case.
okay.
Okay.
There's a question in the chat. Is this
Is
even
this
when using
even when
IU
using-
approved?
Yes.
Hi, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to understand. You were saying, IRB said not human subjects. If we're using it in a way where we've already analyzed and we're just validating, and we're putting it in AI, our IU approved AI, so ChatGPT, and it's de-identified, why do we need to go to IRB? Is it just we're just being ultra safe, or is there some kind of risk or something?
April, we're going to defer that question. I just messaged Zach. We need a session from the IRB here about AI. So I want to make sure Jade gets through her materials. But thank you for the question.
I would still say generally the default I would say is you need to have IRB still assess that and not do it without IRB approval.
It's better to ask
Yeah.
than not.
Third point here, data security. It's really important for the researcher to recognize whether they're using cloud-based tools, where the data is being stored, could it be used for model training, and once the data enters the system, how the data is being used becomes less clear, and so control is really impossible. We've already spoken a little bit about transparency and methods that goes to reporting the use of AI in your research publications. Fifth is really effective human oversight of AI. It was a major point of emphasis in literature we spoke about earlier, and then in the exercises we're going to go through right now. We hope to really illustrate some of the key principles of this domain. We just really want to emphasize that it's important to ensure effective human oversight and to make sure that we monitor for biases, both in the AI output and among the research team itself, right? And to observe, record, and where possible, mitigate limitations of the research approach and AI tools efforts. And then, as Adam mentioned before he departed, we just want to set a reminder that all this data that we're using for this practice is dummy data that we generated using Google Gemini. And that's another recommendation, is that you can use synthetic or dummy data, maybe some of the data that we provided for this session. This really allows you to build the skills without introducing unnecessary risk to participants. And we've employed the best practices in building the data for the exercises today. Okay. So exercise 1, we are going to do an implied demonstration of using generative AI for coding. So we're specifically focused on this activity that is which many of you may know is one of the most labor-intensive steps of qualitative research. So what we want to explore here is not just whether AI can code, because obviously it clearly can, but how well it performs and under what conditions, and importantly, where we as researchers need to step in. So objective for exercise 1 is to evaluate how generative AI applies a structured code book to qualitative data. So we've designed this activity to mirror pretty typical analytic workflow. So we're starting with the initial code book, we're applying it, and then we're refining it. So when we go through this, I want you to think critically about, does AI's coding feel accurate? Is it interpretable? And then would you trust it in your own work? So before we look, I want to briefly ground us in the data. This is based on a study examining disparities in kidney transplant access using dialysis staff perspectives. Our research question is, what barriers and facilitators to transplant access in the early steps of the kidney transplant process do dialysis staff perceive, particularly for Black patients, as compared to other patients and patients in other racial groups? So today in our coding exercise, we're going to focus on a few themes: patient education practices and perceived lack of interest. Two themes which, for our purposes today, we can assume emerged from our own human-led read of the study transcripts, memoing, and team discussion. One thing to note here is that the qualitative data, this is qualitative data with layered context. So we're looking at perceptions, interpretations, and potentially involvement of factors at the individual, clinic, community, and health system levels. So recognition of the importance of these multi-level factors in our analysis is grounded in the socio-ecological framework, which is a framework that our team uses for a lot of our work. So it's not just simple descriptive data. This is kind of the data set where the interpretation and the nuance really matters. Okay, so if you want to follow along, now's the time to kind of pull up the generative AI tool of your choice and the code book. So you'll have the code book, the transcript, and then the structured prompt, which is included in the instructions. And so what's important to note is that we're not refining anything yet. This is a clean test of how AI performs with the initial specifications. And then this reflects how many people first use AI. So we plug in the data, we provide instructions, and then we evaluate the output. And then as we look at the results, think about, where does it perform well? Where does it start to break down? So here's a little snapshot of that prompt that you all can plug in. It might be easier to copy and paste if you have those instructions pulled up. Okay, so let me give a second for people to do that. Yes, the file name. So the instructions are attached to the calendar invite for this meeting. If you're not able to do it now live, you can also go back and do this after the session if that's easier for you.
While you're waiting, Jane, you may want to answer Brielle's question about,
Yes.
was this generated by AI or was it just text by you?
Yes, so this data, or this transcript for exercise 1 was generated using, so we input the open-ended questions for this specific question of interest that we got from a real survey that we sent to dialysis staff. And we provided AI with very detailed prompt on generating a transcript that could be used for a workshop on practicing coding with qualitative AI. So this is all dummy data. Okay. And move on to going over what we got when we input it. Okay. So your output could look something like this. So the results, yes, AI can categorize the data into predefined categories like we wanted it to. But now that we've got the output, it's important for us to validate AI's work product. And so I want to walk through the first quote specifically. So it says, if a patient doesn't immediately leave the idea, kind of drops off the radar. And if they say something like, I need to think about it, it's really easy for it to be written down as not interested. So AI coded that as perceived lack of interest of the patient in proceeding in the process or pursuing transplant itself. So that one seems pretty good, right? But then when we look at the second and third one, here we're seeing where the highlighted text gives us some concern, right? Signals that AI inferred by perceived lack of interest or desperate education practices isn't exactly what we intended here. So what we actually meant, if we get more specific, is when we say perceived lack of interest, we're referring specifically to staff perceptions of Black patients as disengaged or uninterested in the transplant-related care, not just general lack of motivation and not clinician or staff behavior or disinterest. And when we say disparate education practices, we really mean inequities in how education is delivered to Black patients specifically, not general staff training issues or system-wide gaps. So it's yeah, go ahead.
My assumption, though, would be that this would all be in the code book.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you are correct. So what's happening here is that AI is applying plausible but misaligned interpretations to our code book. So clearly we need to pause and recalibrate our code book because what we're seeing in AI output isn't necessarily wrong, right? But it reflects how the model is interpreting our code book, which we use some broad, imprecise language on purpose, right? And this is generally an important point. The AI is not misunderstanding language. Its coding output reflects the ambiguity in our codebook definitions. So this reflects something that's always been true in qualitative research, but appears to be really true when using AI. Clarity in our constructs and codebook is not just helpful, it's essential for valid analysis.
You can kind of see that AI very often just jumps onto keywords in a paragraph. You know, if it says education, that's going to be disparate education, but it doesn't catch the nuance really that's in it.
Yeah, so if you go and now we're going to redo the exercise and we're going to use codebook version 2, where we've added some more specificity to our definition, inclusion and exclusion criteria, and see how AI performs. So you're going to do the same exact prompt, same data, and then input codebook version 2. And we're going to see how AI performs in comparison to with codebook 1. Yes.
So while people are running this, at some point, if you can talk about, so this is kind of top-down coding where you have a code book and you try to see what in the text matches any of the concepts. Of course, you can also do inductive coding where you don't start with a code book. And if at some point during the presentation you get to that, would be great.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have a specific activity on this, but yeah, we haven't tested like how AI does in terms of inductive coding, but can definitely give it a test. Okay, so Here's our output after using codebook version 2, which is that refined codebook where we specified a little bit more of what we're looking for in coding segments. So I just want to pause and ask you all, how do you think AI did compared to version 1? Any meaningful differences in what it coded? Some may look the same.
And a lot less in them.
Yeah, so AI is more selective in what it codes. It's better at distinguishing concepts. It's more aligned in our underlying meaning of what we were hoping to capture.
And I think you got the middle one pretty much like I would code it.
Yeah.
The top and the bottom, again, I don't think the top is exactly what you said, you know.
Yeah.
Perceived lack of interest by the clinic staff. This person, isn't it just, that's not what the first one says. So I think there's still upside potential.
I was actually thinking, there's a question in the chat that I was thinking similarly about using AI, not so much initially to do the analysis as it is to actually check the inner reliability between human coders. How's that work?
That's not something that we've tested.
Okay.
I'd be interested to look at
You
that.
could definitely do that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
You'd probably be actually pretty good at that.
Okay.
Would that require a IRB amendment and I guess a statement in the methods that you used it to calculate your kappa? I mean,
I think the biggest thing is putting the data into any AI tools. So as long as you have that done, whatever method you're doing thereafter are probably fine. But as long as you have the data approved for use, that's the key.
Okay. So just wanted to share this statement that AI gave when we asked it to rerun with Codebook 2. AI explicitly explains what it chose to exclude based on the refined definitions. So that's a signal that the boundaries we introduced are now constraining the output in a meaningful way aligned with our research goals. And what changed here is not AI, but the structure that we gave it. So on some level, this illustration is really a core principle of qualitative research. Clear code definitions should lead to more consistent application, whether by human or by AI. So to summarize some key takeaways from exercise. One, first, coding is only as strong as its code book. We know that. We saw that directly in output reflected in how well we defined our constructs. I would note that a poorly specified code book is something that a human qualitative research team can sometimes get away with, particularly if the research maybe is small, there's a small number of codes, and the team members are well aligned in understanding focal codes. So it might be something that qualitative researchers might overlook in some cases, even without AI in picture. It's a good reminder of the code, the importance of a robust code book in qualitative research. Second, ambiguity leads to systematic misclassification. So AI wasn't random, it was consistently applying the codes, but in ways that didn't align with our intended meaning. And then third, AI does not independently learn rigor. The researcher embeds rigor through iteration. So improvements we saw came from changes to our code book, not from AI getting better. And lastly, human oversight really remains essential. That's our key point here, particularly in validating meaning, resolving ambiguity, and ensuring construct validity. So overall, the redefined definitions improved coding precision and boundary setting, but it wasn't perfect, right? And importantly, that's true for both AI and human coding. Okay, so now we're going to shift from coding to something a little bit more complex, generating themes across a data set. And so for this one, I want you to pay attention to not just what AI produces again, but how the outputs change depending on what we ask it to do. So go through this exercise, and I want you to not just think about the themes it develops itself, but to reflect on the outputs more closely. How interpretive are they? How structured? Whether they reach the level of depth along the lines of what you would expect in your own work. So this data set is intentionally different from what we use in exercise 1. You're not going to be using the transcript, where you're going to use open-ended survey responses. And instead of, and we're answering the same question. So each response has less content and less context, and there are more of them. So there's more variability in tone, detail, and focus. So this type of data is pretty common in survey-based data, and it's often when people first use AI because of the volume. So but it comes with some challenges, because when context is limited, interpretation becomes a little bit more difficult. Okay, so first step, we're going to start very simple. The prompt that I'm going to show in a second, and it is included on instructions for exercise 2 document that's included in the calendar hold. The prompt is intentionally minimal. There's no framework, no additional guidance, and no structure beyond just generate themes. This is a pretty realistic starting point. If you're actually testing AI for the first time, you're trying to move quickly, this is likely the type of prompt you might use. So here's the prompt. You're a qualitative researcher, conduct thematic analysis on the attached open-ended responses and summarize the main themes, format themes into a table with a description. Okay, so go ahead and test this in your preferred IU approved tool. And if you don't have time to do it now, definitely do it after. So it's on the last page of exercise 2 instructions, if you scroll down. We move on because we're short on time a little bit. Okay, so I know this is a lot. We're going to zoom into a few of the themes here in a second. But at first glance, our initial thought of what AI generated was pretty reasonable. Many of the themes are pretty familiar if you do work in health equity and access. They're not correct, right? They might align in general sense of what we know about the topic of kidney transplant access. But I want you to look a little closely at the ones I'm going to show in a second, reflect on the themes, just to say like, how in depth do they look, and or is it initial sorting or grouping of themes? So here are 4 of the themes. Look at these and just generally tell me your initial thoughts of them. Any strengths, limitations?
I mean, it doesn't really seem too far off the mark. Although grammatically speaking, I'm not impressed by AI not knowing the difference between who and that. By medical staff that act. It actually should be by medical staff who act as a gatekeeping mechanism. But overall, I think, general overview is, it's pretty much captured most of this pretty well.
Okay. Any other thoughts you want to share before we? Yes. so potentially influenced by previously documented themes. I would agree, yes.
And you might need to change sessions when you're switching, because it learned from what you prompted it.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Okay. So next, we're going to introduce a different approach. Instead of the minimal prompt, we're going to add more context using a structured approach. So things we're going to include are the research aim, population, and the theoretical framework. So rather just asking for it to generate themes, we're going to provide some guidance about how to approach the data. And this is a long theme or long prompt. So I'd recommend scrolling down to page 2 of the instructions and copying, pasting, and opening a new session or a new kind of tab of Gemini and not using the one that you did for the last one. So I just want to clarify where this prompt structure is coming from. It's adapted from Naeem et al., who outlined a step-by-step approach for conducting thematic analysis using large language models. So what we've done here is translate core elements of rigorous qualitative workflows into the prompt itself. So including embedding the research aim, research question, specifying the study content, context, and data type, grounding the analysis in the socio-ecological model, and structuring the task to mirror coding, theme development, and synthesis that we did as human researchers. So the goal is not just to give AI more information, but to structure the task in a way that reflects how we would conduct qualitative analysis as researchers. So as we look at the next output, I want you to think about what changes and just as importantly, what doesn't. Okay, so here, again, a lot, but we're looking at the output generated using the literature-informed structured prompt. At high level, you might notice that some of the differences compared to the initial output are that the themes appear more organized, more clearly grouped, and in many cases, they include sub-themes and more detailed descriptions. There's also a stronger alignment to our research question and theoretical framing we embedded into the prompt. So this may feel more closer to the formal thematic analysis that we would do. So just to look at a few of the themes, picked ones that kind of closely align to the ones that we looked at for the initial, ill-informed prompt. So what we've done here is I want you to look at, does this feel more organized than what we saw before? What are people's thoughts here?
I guess one thing that is nice about the organization of this prompt as opposed to the first one is that not only does it just discuss the rationale for why it chooses the themes or sub-themes that it does, but it also describes how well it's aligned with the conceptual model that you put forward as well, and where those where the themes and sub-themes might fit in within the socio-ecological model itself.
Yeah. Great point. Something we also noticed in running this. Okay. So our next exercise was going to have you go in and make changes to refine this literature-informed prompt. Yes, the second prompt is in the document. On the last page. Okay, so the second activity, or the third portion of this activity, was to have you all take note of those last themes that were developed and make changes to the prompt that you think would make the output in your eyes better, right? Something that is more useful. And by useful here, I mean something that a researcher would reasonably build from. So something that looks like a near final output, but of course would require validation, refinement, and interpretation. You're a bit limited in time, so if you, okay.
Yeah, I have 1 8 minutes.
Okay. I'm gonna move on, but feel free to do that independently as we move on to the next one. So up to this
We
point,
want to reserve some time at the end for
Yeah.
questions,
Okay.
you know, because I'm having a feeling that a lot of people have questions.
yeah, okay. So this third part was just to illustrate, changes that we would make as a research team to the prompt. So here's some examples of things that we added to kind of get our, what we would say, gold standard prompt. We added more detail about you as a researcher and your experience level, as well as asking it to synthesize across the different levels of the socio-ecological model, which is something that we realized was something that it wasn't doing. And then also, asking it to put it into something that we would maybe put into a manuscript. So illustrative quotations, thick descriptions, sub-themes. That's a lot, but here's a zoom in on kind of what the output for this gold standard prompt. And we can share this after the fact if people want to take a closer look. So key conclusions from this exercise, we walked through its progression. So not just outputs, but how the analysis is being shaped. At the beginning, themes look reasonable, but they're broad and pretty descriptive. So that's something that many of us would recognize as closer to summarization than analysis. So as we added more structure, we see improvements, but those improvements showed up first in organization, not necessarily interpretation, until we added more detail. So here, again, as the literature stated, AI is pretty good with organizing information, grouping, structuring, and formatting, but it maybe struggles with interpreting, meaning, identifying nuance, and making decisions about how concepts relate to one another within a specific context. So I briefly want to bring us back to where we started, where we outlined qualitative research life cycle. We are going to revisit this framework and just really emphasize that decisions on using AI impacts this entire life cycle. And that's important to really recognize. And I'm going to move over to our conclusions. Just say that the one thing that we really want you all to get from this session is that discipline really matters. And we're entering a new phase of qualitative research where AI can really accelerate parts of the process, but the speed without structure introduces risk. That means that the things that we've relied on in qualitative research become even more important. Clear frameworks, strong construct definitions, and transparent analytic decisions. So AI works best when it's grounded in gold standard qualitative methods. So not replacing them, but extending them. So we may ask, what can AI do for me? But we should shift that question to how do I design rigorous analytic processes that AI can support? Because ultimately AI can process data, but it cannot ensure validity, it cannot ensure nuance, and it cannot ensure participant voices are accurately represented. That responsibility remains with us. And it brings us back to our core principle of rigorous qualitative research with AI requires an active human in the loop. Okay. Here are some resources through AI. IU, and we can share these in our slides, but they should all be available to you all on IU's websites as well. And happy to answer any questions. Yes. Okay. Any guidance on tools or techniques for evaluation of the AI results in this context, quality metrics? So in the last talk that Dr. Wilk and Dr. Patzer gave, they gave some recommendations on how to evaluate AI's outputs. Be happy to reshare some of those slides. There are also a lot of courses out there. One that I took that I can reshare the information with Zach, that they went over some detail about how we can evaluate our AI outputs. Okay. Can we actually say with certainty that AI can inductively assess themes? So I don't think that we can say with certainty that AI tools are not referring to prior literature and background, right, when producing inductive codes or any outputs that they're producing, right? But I think that's also true with human researchers, right? We're recalling back to literature and stuff like that.
You could probably also include in the prompt something that says it to stick to ABC, right?
You just have to be very specific.
Okay. Question around recommendations for ensuring that AI is sticking to language actually used by participants versus generalizing or changing language. Yes, I think that is, as you pointed out in your question, really dependent on the prompt that you provided. I can think a little bit more about, the prompting to make sure that those are, or like the language of participants is kept in the forefront. But I would say that that is a limitation. It's something that when I was doing the practice to output some of the results for this presentation, I did notice that in some instances it was changing some of the language that was used. And so, yeah, I think it's clear prompting is the message here.
Let me ask the last question. The big thing that cruises around in my head is when should I use this at all?
Yeah.
Your domain is fairly complex. You have a lot of frameworks, many of which I don't know, but obviously there's a lot of context needed to do a good job coding these transcripts, which I'm sure, before AI, which wasn't that long ago, you spent a lot of time on. If you contrast that with a simpler interview study where the concepts are not as nuanced and so on, I wonder what the heuristics are that you would use to say, okay, here you can try AI. I mean, a little bit, this is like training an undertrained grad student. And I'm like, okay, why do I want to invest my time, in this? As opposed to maybe giving some really novice students a leg up in terms of qualitative analysis, but saying, from a certain point onwards, we're gonna do this manually.
Yeah.
Because I mean, what I saw today is I'm like, okay, well, you certainly can't trust it out of the box.
Yeah, I will say caveat that the data that we use in the transplant space is very complex, and Adam and I were working on a paper for this and talking a little bit about in the discussion about how it might not be as useful for like our line of research, but in less complex like data sets, it probably performs better. There are some in the literature where they did some comparisons in a more rigorous like comparison of AI versus human researcher like themes, and it performed like pretty well with like same limitations that we saw, but maybe the magnitude of the impact of those limitations is a little bit less than for our research. So I think that there are situations in which, you know, you could probably get away with using AI for thematic analysis or across the qualitative research spectrum, like easier than what we presented here today. And so my recommendation would be to following IRB protocols and understanding all of that, to test it with your own data or dummy data that you generated that's possibly less complex than the data that we presented here today, and comparing outputs, maybe what you did for manual thematic analysis versus what AI generates.
All right, well, thank you very much. Round of applause. And please use the react button, but nice job, Adam. Up in the air and Jade here on the ground. So thanks.